Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to please click subscribe if you enjoy my videos. I'm currently growing the channel and I'm getting very close to 1,000 subscribers, so it would mean the world to me if you could support me. And today we're going to be talking about Thalia and the Gitrog Monster for one colorless, one white, one black, one green. It's a legendary creature, human frog horror 4/4 with first strike, death touch. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever Thalia and the Gitrog Monster attacks, sacrifice a creature or land, then draw a card. This card is absolutely insane, and I've thought that since it was first spoiled. This just does so many different things and it does them all very well. First strike and death touch makes it an absolute pain to deal with in combat. An extra land drop is always going to be great, and then it mirrors that by making all of your opponent's non-basic lands and creatures come in tapped, which slows them down significantly. But not only that, you even have a free sack outlet that lets you draw a card every turn, and you can even sacrifice lands with it, which is going to work with a lot of the synergies that we have in our deck. So this really does everything, and people are probably going to try to get it off the table a lot because of that coming in tapped ability. That is really powerful, and this is probably one of the strongest mid-range commanders we've ever had. So in this deck list, I'm going to be building around landfall mostly, because that seems like it's quite a good angle to take here, but we also want to be making tokens, so a lot of our landfall cards are going to work as tokens that we can then sacrifice to this card's final ability. We're also going to be ramping really well thanks to being able to play an extra land every turn, so we have quite a few cards that allow us to reuse our lands from the graveyard or just bring them back to hand, which is going to mean that we are going to be able to play those extra lands every single turn. If you do build this deck, I would recommend that you include quite a few fetch lands in the mana base, whether they be the expensive fetch lands or just stuff like Terramorphic Expanse. It's all fine, but it is going to make it much easier to make those extra land drops, which you absolutely want to be doing with Thalia and the Gitrog Monster. So anyway, we're going to start off with Ancient Green Warden. This is a must in any landfall deck. It's going to work super well, and it's still going to allow us to play lands from our graveyard. So it fits every angle that this deck could want perfectly. Next up, we have Aven Mind Sensor. There's a little bit of a hate bear theme in this deck since our commander already does a little bit of that. This is going to punish our opponents for searching their library. It's going to work really well against people that are trying to combo off or tutor all the time, and it can also low-key punish ramp players as well, so I quite like this. Avenger of Zendikar is one of our finishes of choice. It should be very, very easy to get the tokens super big because we can immediately make a land drop, and if they don't kill Avenger of Zendikar, we can presumably make another one if Thalia's in play, and if we have any sort of fetch card on there, this can immediately put 3 counters on all of our tokens. Beast Whisperer is a great way for us to draw cards. This is one of the weaker aspects of the deck. I think the card draw, even though our commander does have card draw built in, so it's nice to have an option to repeatedly draw cards. Braid's Arisen Nightmare is another way we can draw cards. We have a few cards that synergize with stuff going to the graveyard, so sacrificing lands to this doesn't seem too bad when we're playing 2 lands a turn. Courser of Krufix is an excellent way to hit our extra land drops by allowing us to play lands from the top of our library. It also gives us a very much needed source of life gain. Delphi Voidwalker, it fits in with the hate bear kind of theme. It's going to mess with our opponent's graveyards, which is always nice, and we can even get to play a good card that we steal from them. And we have quite a bit of recursion in this deck, so it should be quite possible to play this multiple times per game. Deathrite Shaman also hates on our opponent's graveyards, which is great, and since we have so many fetch lands in the deck, this is basically a 1-mana ramp spell, which is great. Drana and Limvala is another hate piece. It's going to make it very difficult for certain combos to fire off, which is nice because we want to be keeping our opponents honest, and we can even have some combos of our own if we drop this after some interesting creatures are already in play. Elish Norn is a flex slot. It works pretty well with our tokens, but you can substitute this for something else. I'm just happy to try it out because I opened it recently and want to finally put it into a deck. Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, is a really great card in this deck because it's going to double all of our landfall triggers, which is going to make it incredibly strong. And apart from our landfall cards, we still have a few cards that have ETBs as well, so this is great. Emeria Angel is going to provide us with little flying bodies, which are great to pester our opponents with, but can also be sacrificed to our commander's ability. Emeria Shepherd is one of the ways to get recursion late game. We can start bringing permanents back whenever we play a plains, so so that's going to make it very difficult for our opponents to keep up. Erebos, God of the Dead is a good way to draw cards, and it can occasionally be pretty relevant as a hate piece. Eternal Witness is just an excellent way to get some recursion late game. Grey Merchant of Asphodel is one of the ways we can finish the game. With Elish Norn out, this can often hit them for a lot of damage, and we have so many ways to recur it that this should be easy to loop a few times to finish the game. Greensleeve's Marrow Sorcerer is one of the best landfall enablers in the game right now. It's just making 3/3s every single land, which is fantastic, not to mention the fact that it gets really big. Morbid Opportunist is a card that ends up overperforming in almost every Commander game. Creatures are going to die, you're going to draw cards, and this is a great way to do so. Perennial Behemoth is one of 4 ways we can play land cards from our graveyard. This is an important effect to have in this kind of deck. It also has a huge 7 toughness, which means that he can hold the fort really well against little creatures. Rampaging Baloths is another of our finishers of choice, so they work pretty well in a landfall deck. Ramunap Excavator also allows us to play lands from our graveyard. We definitely want a critical mass of this sort of effect. Sakura Tribe Elder is going to ramp us pretty well, but otherwise it's an early speed bump that gets us to 4 mana on turn 3. Sepulchral Primordial is a great card to finish off the game. We're going to get to steal 3 things from our opponents. As you will see, we have a few ways to mill our opponents, so this should be able to pick some good stuff. Springbloom Druid is basically Harrow on a stick, and Harrow is a very good card in this deck. Sun Titan is going to provide some excellent recursion late game. There's a lot of cool stuff that we can bring back with this card. Shuriken Goreclaw is going to give trample to all of our creatures and haste to our non-tokens. This is a great way to finish the game out of nowhere by providing a lot of damage. Sylvan Safekeeper allows us to protect our key pieces whilst also putting lands into the graveyard, which we don't care too much about in this deck. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, is a good hate piece that is thematical with this deck. Since we're playing 2 lands a turn, we shouldn't have too much trouble with attacks, but it should hurt our opponents quite a bit. The Gitrog Monster is always going to be one of the best cards in the deck, seeing as we're going to be putting lands into the graveyard fairly often, and obviously it thematically fits perfectly as well. Timeless Witness is just more redundancy to Eternal Witness, and it's a great card in its own right. Talus Provisioner is really good in the early game for making treasure tokens, but late game, do not ignore the fact that this can actually make food, because you can actually gain a ton of life off of this when you have enough mana. Talus Tracker is going to make clue tokens, which are an excellent way to draw cards, and we should have a lot of mana left over to crack them. Titania Protector of Argoth is almost always going to ramp us, and then whenever we put a land into the graveyard, we're going to get a 5/3, which is amazing. The new Vorinclex is going to work super well in this deck by searching up a couple of lands for us when he comes into play, which is great with our commander. And then if we have enough mana and we think that the coast is clear, we can just go nuts with his flip side. For sorceries, we have Breach the Multiverse, which I feel is great in this deck. We're going to get 4 creatures with this, and we're actually going to fill up our opponent's graveyards for all of our other reanimate effects, which is fantastic. Incarnation Technique does a very similar thing to Breach the Multiverse, only on a smaller scale. Life from the Loam is going to be one of the best cards in the deck by recycling all those lands in our graveyard and putting them back into our hands so we can play them again. And moving on to instants, we have Crop Rotation, which is a great way to search up interesting utility lands. Harrow and Roiling Regrowth are both great, as we've mentioned earlier. Heroic Intervention is going to allow us to protect our board, because this is a very board-based deck, and the win cons are basically very slow and grindy. Malakir Rebirth is going to allow us to protect key pieces. And for enchantments, we have Druid class, which is a great way to gain some life, and then when we upgrade it, it's going to allow us to get extra land drops on each of our turns, so it's more redundancy for our commander's effect. Finally, the last mode makes a really big dude, which is fine. Felidar Retreat is a great way to close off games in the mid to late game by putting multiple counters on our board. Early on, it can also make tokens, which are great. Tribute to the World Tree is going to make sure that all those tokens that we're making are entering pretty beef, and in cases where the tokens are bigger than 3/3s, then we're just going to draw a card with every landfall, which is fantastic. Conduit of Worlds again allows us to play stuff from the graveyard, whether that be lands or permanents. This is going to be great. For Planeswalkers, we have the Eternal Wanderer. I've been putting this into most of my decks, and it always overperforms. This is going to be fantastic because it hits multiple angles that we care about in this deck. The board wipe is obviously the main reason for playing it, but we have a lot of ETPs that we can rebuy, and then making a token works really great with our commander's sacrifice ability. Renin 7 similarly hits a bunch of different angles that we want to be hitting. We're going to be putting multiple lands into our hands, which is great whilst we fill up our graveyard, and then we also get to make just huge tokens, which is something that we're really interested in, and finally we can just actually get some crazy wins out of nowhere by triggering landfall multiple times with its 0 ability. As for lands, I've chosen to highlight 2 of them here. Argoth, Sanctum of Nature, is great because it's going to fill up our graveyard so that we can use it for other stuff whilst making us tokens. And then Tectonic Edge is a great land in this deck because we get to reuse it over and over from our graveyard. You could also put in something like Wasteland if you have it. Any of that kind of effect is going to be great with so many effects that let us play lands from graveyards. Because of this too, Takenuma Abandoned Mire is going to be an excellent card. We can just channel it to fill up our graveyard and get a creature or planeswalker back to our hand, and then later on in the game we can just replay it from the graveyard, which is great. So there you have it. That has been our Thalia and the Gitrog Monster deck tech. What do you think about this one? Are you as excited as I am to play it? I'm going to be sleeving this up and playing it on Monday, I think, for the first time, and we are really close to 1,000 subscribers, so thank you so much, and please stay tuned to the channel because I'm probably going to be doing a giveaway once we hit 1,000. I'll let you know what that's going to be in an upcoming video. What do you think? Are there any things you would change? Any additions that you think I missed? Please let me know in the comment section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.